Hi, this is my review of Stalingrad 42, published by GMT Games. First up is the rulebook. The rulebook's about 30 odd pages. Don't be intimidated by the number of pages. It's very well written. It's very clear. All the mechanics are painstakingly explained. I would describe the game as it's the higher end of medium for me. But actually, a lot of the mechanics on their own are quite straightforward, and there's a great playbook I'll show in a second, and you can go through that and learn how all the mechanics work. If you've not played one of the Mark Simonich's war games like this, there are a few things. One of them being the Zoc bonds, which is where you have two counters and they form a bond between them. And that stops the enemy from going through and things like that. But again, it's all very well detailed. Combat is very straightforward, I find, as is movement. And there are small examples, but there is a completely separate playbook which I'll go through. As we get towards the end of the rule book, let's just find it quickly. You get advanced rules, which I have used all of those, and they're they're worth doing. They're quite straightforward, I found. And then right at the end, we get to our scenarios. I'm just going to show those quickly. That's worth mentioning for a second. So basically, you get 3 scenarios, and then you get the full campaign game. The full campaign game has all those scenarios in it as one great big long campaign. I've played through each scenario a couple of times, and I've played through the campaign game twice. I've just finished the campaign game. That's why I'm doing the review now. The scenarios are different lengths and different number of maps. So for blue is 8 turns. I think that's probably the shortest scenario, I would say, in terms of turns. Whereas the actual campaign game is 36 turns. This scenario 1, only uses 1 map. The campaign game uses all 3 maps, although one of those maps is actually 2 maps. So it's quite a large physical space needed. But the first scenario is regular war game size, this sort of scale of game. Next up, we have the playbook. The playbook is a series of examples of turns. Got a lovely illustration on the cover. As a lot of you know, I do like drawing tanks myself. Yeah, that's an awesome job on that. This book basically goes through examples of play, which I think is one of the best way to learn the game. When I first got the game, I've had the game a while now, actually, from when it came out, and I set the scenario 1 up and just went through the examples, went through the different turns and all the different phases of a turn by going through this book, just checking the rules to make sure I completely understood what was happening and why it was happening. This helps you understand the why. Helps you understand the nuances of the mechanics in actually a couple of turns, and then you can then finish the campaign off yourself, and there's a good way to learn the game. Brilliantly written, very well illustrated with examples as well. So, and some of those examples, it's fine. You get loads of actually examples of the map and how movement is working, and these and they do that for example, that's the Caucasus. They do that for every single scenario and campaign, which is great. I found, just take your time. It's not a game you're going to set up and start playing in half an hour. Go through the rule book, lay some counters out so you understand the basics of how combat and movement work. If you're not familiar with this particular designer's type of games, and then go through this. That's how I did it. I think it's a good way to learn. But take your time. It's going to take you, a period of time to go through that. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed going through through these with the book in front of me and learning the game in that way. It's extremely an enjoyable wargaming experience in its own right. And then you get towards the end, designer notes, historical notes. Again, these were great. I would say, like a lot of these sort of war games, the more you put into doing your own historical research, I think the more you'll get out of the game. It's one of the things I love about this style of war game. It's very authentic and historically rich, this game, and therefore the more you understand that and the more knowledge you have, the more you're going to get out of it. But yeah, both this and the rulebook I thought were great, extremely enjoyable. and a brilliant job. So next up, player aids. This is the key player aid you're going to be using. It's the combat. On one side is combat. On the flip side is terrain. Both movement, terrain is very straightforward. The map does a really good job, and we'll have a look at the map in a minute, of the content of each of the hex, and the effects on combat. In particular, it's probably worth calling out that a lot of the hex will give the defenders advantage, as you'd expect. In particular, fighting over a river, not so good for the attacker. The attacker, depending on the river type, can have their attack value halved and the defender duplicated. And the same with them, obviously when the defenders are in cities and things like that. Very clear. CRT, it's an interesting CRT, in as much as once you've worked out your odds, so the attacker's strength versus the defender's value, you'll come with an odd, as you would expect, and that can be shifted, and it tells you on this sheet how you can shift it. So you can shift it in the favour of the attacker or the defender. So, for example, if the attacker's got tanks, that will shift in their favour. If the Germans have elite tanks, that will shift in their favour. Air support, artillery support, and it's all just shifting the columns backwards and forwards. What is interesting, and this is the results, for two reasons. Actually, one, the results themselves. So a lot of the results require the defender to retreat, and the attacker can advance. So it's a game with a lot of movement as a result of combat. And then the second is that the defender can do what they call determined defense. So instead of accepting the result, the defender, depending, can roll on this further determined defense table. A good roll with modifiers can swing, can change that result to not retreat. Conversely, a bad result can actually incur more step losses to the defender. And it's a mechanic that I really enjoyed. And again, it's very clear. All the modifiers are all on this one chart, so it's great. In addition, you get, thankfully, you get some great player aids for setting up your game. So you go through your counters, clip them if you want, and set them up on this sheet, and from this sheet they go onto the map. It does take a little while, I'll be honest with you, but this helps enormously, especially as you get this example here. This is the Axis campaign reinforcements. So you can put all the reinforcements for the whole game on this sheet here. So when you come to each turn, you know exactly which counters to use. Found this extremely useful for someone who spent ages, hours sometimes, sorting through counters when it comes to the reinforcements phase. I would say this is brilliant. And again, very clear and very nicely laid out. Very neat, great player aids. So this is the full campaign maps laid out. I've got some plexi down, and as you can see, the light through the windows reflecting all over it. Apologies for that. But it's just to give you some idea of the size of the full campaign. So basically, what you have is you have 4 paper maps that actually combine together to make 3. So the carcasses at the bottom here is actually 2. I didn't put plexi on so you could just see. It's actually 2 paper maps, and you got 2 maps here. You combine them all together to make the full campaign. You'll need a fair size table. Here in the UK, it's sort of, you'll need, I don't know, 4 foot by 3.5 foot. It's no help to people in metric. Apologies for that. But if you've got the space and you want to play the full campaign, it looks great. And actually setting it all out and setting all the counters out is actually part of the wargaming hobby I particularly enjoy. It looks absolutely brilliant, and it looks a very inviting game. There is quite a few counters, as you can see, especially on sort of as we're starting in June. So you've got sort of case blue sort of set out on this sort of side. I'm just looking at my hand and the camera at the same time. Over that sort of area there, and it's pretty straightforward to set up. I would say that, as you would expect, the hex contents in terms of the terrain is very clear. The hexes are numbered brilliantly. It's very clear. You can't see. If I move the camera, maybe you can. Down at the bottom here, the hex numbers, you can't see them on some of the darker terrain, but you can work it out. If I'm being fair, it's the only time I couldn't see any of the hex numbers, but it's not insurmountable. It's very clear where all the rivers are. Very clear the contents of the hexes, and yeah, just looks absolutely great. This is, for me, this is one of the aspects of the wargaming hobby I love. I do like large map games. They do take a long time to play. The full campaign, I don't know. I don't think you could do it in one sitting. I've spent like a leisurely weekend, so Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, to play through the full campaign. The actual individual scenarios will play a lot quicker. I think Case Blue is 8 turns, whereas this is 36 turns. So you can use that as a measure. I think Case Blue is probably the quickest playing scenario, I would say, in the game. But generally speaking, and I would say actually the gameplay itself is, because it's fairly once you understand how the combat works and how movement works and all those nuances of that, it has a very brisk pace. So the actual turns themselves don't take too long once you understand all the mechanics. So I've just zoomed in a little bit on the map, just to talk about some of the mechanics. As I've said, I actually think the core mechanics of movement and combat, working out the combat modifiers and the results of the combat is very straightforward. It's what helps makes this game move at a fairly brisk pace once you understand it and you've been through it. So, for example, your counters have an attack value and a defense value, and in this example, I've just put this here just to illustrate. You're comparing the attack versus the defense. That'll give you the odds. This counter here is a German elite Panzer, which has got a red dot, so you know that. So that gives it more shifts in favour. I can use the artillery piece, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, I can use that piece that's within range. So I could again use this piece here. This is the command, and also doubles up as the artillery. That can help me shift the odds in my favour as the attacker. I would flip that when I've done that, and I can use supply points to give it more supply, so I can use it again. And it's actually it's a very straightforward set of mechanics, and depending on the results, the defender may retreat, having taken step losses and so forth. Can even retreat at a full retreat or in disorder, and then I can, depending on the results, I can do follow-up moves and potentially attacks and so forth. Actual core mechanics are quite straightforward, and I'm not going to go into every single detail and nuances. There's a ton of videos on YouTube that do a way better job of describing every single mechanic. What I would say is that it's a game best enjoyed taking it at a fairly leisurely pace, taking your time. Actual combat resolution between the stacks is very quick. You're only really using that one player aid, and it's very straightforward, because the player aid has the combat and the terrain modifiers. So, for example, here in these defences that the Soviets have, they have a column shift for being in there. So it works really well. And like I said, the game has a lot of movement in it. Looks like it could be a game of a fairly static line and attrition. And the truth is, it's not really. The truth is that a lot of those combat results are going to require the Soviets to retreat, and then be able to counterattack later, as you would expect with this period of history. So there's a lot of pushing movement. The Germans are kind of using blitzkrieg type attacks. If anything, the emphasis is on the Axis player, I should say, rather than German player. The Axis player, because multiple nations on the Axis side here to be able to show a little bit of restraint, I find, and just control their lioness through the game. Yeah, like I said, the mechanics are pretty all very straightforward, streamlined, well described, and just place some counters. The stacks aren't too big. The largest stacks really are sort of on the Axis side. They can actually have more counters in a stack than the Soviets. So initially, straight away can give them an odds advantage. And the Soviet stacks are normally sort of 2 counters high, and the Axis, 2 or 3. I think the Axis are allowed 3 counters. The Soviets 2. Plus there are some free counters that you can use. So this one here actually, dear, it's not that stack over, clumsy. Has a white key line around it, and that shows it's a free stacking. It's a free stacking counter. So some stacks may have 4 counters, but for the most part, stacks aren't too large. As I beautifully demonstrated then, the counters are normal size, so you probably will need tweezers to move the counters about, which is what I normally use to move the counters around. But yeah, mechanics wise, it's a pretty straightforward game. Combat movement, yeah, and all the there are a lot of nuances and extra mechanics, and I've just described. So the Soviet player and the Axis player can create fortifications, and there are rules about attacking over rivers and all those sort of things. So yeah, there's a depth to them, I think, and there's nuances to them that you'll learn through play. So some closing thoughts. What I liked about the game is partly what I like about the series of games from Mark Simonich. The components are all brilliant. The maps are lovely and gorgeous, and the counters are very straightforward, easy to read. All the mechanics I found made sense. I found reading the rulebook was very clear. I found going through those tutorials was a lot of fun and helped me understand the game. It is a game, I can't stress this enough, about spending time with it. As you can see from all the counters, and even this sort of close-in shot, there's a lot of counters. Not, compared to the grand scheme of war games. I mean, there's not hundreds and hundreds compared to other games, but there is still quite a few counters. And the campaign is 36 turns, so expect to play it over a long weekend. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed playing the scenarios on their own. I enjoyed playing through the full campaign. All the mechanics I found made sense and streamlined. And I can remember maybe the first campaign I played, or the first scenario I played, I used the rulebook quite a lot. But broadly speaking, I felt like I understood enough of the mechanics, how they work, to enjoy the game and play the game. And it's a game that invites you to play it. There's a great sense of movement. There's a great sense of drama. There's that rich, super rich historical content here. And again, the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out. So the more understanding you do, all your own research into this period of World War II histories, it's very well worthwhile. So I read a couple of books, for example, on the Caucasus section, because that was something I didn't know a huge amount about, and found that very enjoyable, and then played that scenario. So yeah, big thumbs up from me. I've enjoyed this game immensely. I think it's as good a place as any to start in the series from Mark's games. If this particular period of World War II history is particularly interesting to you, I think that's important, because this is not a game you're going to set up and play in a couple of hours. I'll be honest with you. Even the smaller campaign, even the smaller scenario. So it just requires certain investment from you. So if you're interested in this period of history and like this period of history, if you've played his other games and you enjoy them, then it's a straightforward no-brainer. This is a great example, I felt, and yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. So yeah, great stuff. High recommendation. Thanks for watching as ever.